I'm Pamela, 29 female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the city, a place I secured through years of careful budgeting and relentless hard work as a financial analyst. For most of my life, I accepted the narrative my family wrote for me, that I was the practical, less ambitious daughter, and that was perfectly fine. But a single, misplaced document would soon reveal that my entire life was built on a foundation of lies, designed to elevate my sister at my expense. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, our family was the picture of suburban success. My father, Richard, was a dentist with a thriving practice, and my mother, Eleanor, was a successful real estate agent. We lived in a beautiful two-story house with a manicured lawn and a two-car garage. To outsiders, we were the ideal family, but inside those walls there was an unspoken hierarchy. My older sister, Veronica, was the star, and I was her shadow. Veronica was brilliant, charismatic, and destined for greatness, or so we were constantly told. She had a natural talent for art and design, and from a young age, our parents funneled resources into her passion. There were expensive summer art camps, private tutors, and a portfolio that looked like it belonged to a seasoned professional by the time she was a senior in high school. I, on the other hand, was quiet and studious. My interests were in math and economics, less glamorous, less visible, and certainly less celebrated. The defining moment, the one that drew a permanent line in the sand between us, came when we were both applying to colleges. Veronica had her heart set on a prestigious Ivy League university with a world-renowned architecture program. The price tag was astronomical, a figure that made me physically dizzy when I saw the brochure, but my parents didn't flinch. "Whatever it takes for our Veronica," my mother would say, her eyes shining with pride. They threw a lavish party when her acceptance letter arrived, the thick, embossed paper treated like a holy relic. My turn came a couple of years later. I had excellent grades, a near-perfect SAT score, and a passion for finance. I'd been accepted into several top-tier business schools, including my dream university, a private institution with a strong alumni network and a great reputation. It was expensive, yes, but significantly less so than Veronica's Ivy League school. I prepared a detailed presentation for my parents, complete with spreadsheets outlining tuition costs, potential scholarships, and a 5-year earnings projection to show them it was a sound investment. I presented it to them one evening in the living room. My father adjusted his glasses, looking over my meticulously prepared documents. My mother just smiled, a tight, unreadable expression on her face. "Pamela, honey," my father began, setting the papers down on the coffee table. "This is very impressive. You've clearly put a lot of thought into this." My heart swelled with hope. "I have," I said eagerly. "I think it's a really solid plan." "It is," he agreed, "but there's a problem." He exchanged a look with my mother. "The thing is, Veronica's education, it was a huge expense. We stretched ourselves to the absolute limit to make that happen for her. We're still recovering financially." My mother chimed in, her voice soft and sympathetic, a tone she always used when delivering bad news. "We just don't have that kind of money left, sweetie. We looked at the numbers and it's impossible. We can afford to help you with community college. You can get your associate's degree, work for a bit, and then maybe transfer to a state school later on if you save up." The words hit me like a physical blow. Community college. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because of the blatant disparity. They had moved mountains for Veronica, but for me, they offered a molehill. "But your practice is doing better than ever," I stammered, looking at my dad. "And Mom, you just sold that big commercial property downtown." "It's more complicated than that, Pamela," my father said dismissively. "There are taxes, overheads, investments we have to make. You wouldn't understand the intricacies." That line, "you wouldn't understand," was a classic. It was their way of ending a conversation they didn't want to have. I felt a hot wave of shame and anger wash over me. I wasn't just being denied my dream school, I was being told I wasn't worth the same investment as my sister. The message was clear. Veronica's future was a priority, a blue-chip stock worth any price. Mine was a speculative penny stock they weren't willing to gamble on. I looked from my father's stoic face to my mother's practiced sympathy and saw a united front I couldn't possibly break. Arguing was pointless. They had made their decision. My future had been weighed against Veronica's, and it had been found wanting. That night, I retreated to my room and cried. I cried for the future I had envisioned for myself, and I cried for the painful confirmation of what I had always suspected. In my family's eyes, I would always be second best. The feeling wasn't just disappointing, it was deeply corrosive, seeping into my sense of self-worth. The next day, I enrolled in the local community college. I promised myself I would work harder than anyone, that I would succeed not because of my family, but in spite of them. I would prove to them, and more importantly, to myself, that I was not a lesser investment. But that promise was a heavy burden to carry, and it was fueled by a quiet, simmering resentment that would stay with me for the next decade. Little did I know, the story they had told me about their finances was not just an excuse. It was the first thread in a web of deceit that was far more complex and cruel than I could have ever imagined. The real betrayal wasn't about money. It was about the deliberate suppression of my potential to maintain the perfect, gleaming image of their golden child. The years that followed that fateful conversation were a study in contrasts between my sister's life and mine. Veronica thrived in the Ivy League environment. Her letters home, which my mother would read aloud at the dinner table like royal decrees, were filled with stories of stimulating classes with world-famous professors, glamorous parties with the children of diplomats, and exciting internships in New York City. Every holiday, she would return home with an air of sophisticated confidence, draped in designer clothes and armed with anecdotes that made my life feel impossibly small and gray. My parents lapped it up. They hung her framed architectural drawings in the living room and bragged to their friends about their daughter, the future star architect. Her successes were the family's successes. Her life was a constant, glittering performance, and we were all expected to be her rapt audience. Meanwhile, I was grinding away. I took a full course load at community college and worked 2 part-time jobs, one at a diner, one as a math tutor to save money. My days started before sunrise and ended late at night, hunched over textbooks at the small desk in my childhood bedroom. There were no parties, no fancy internships, no stories worth sharing at the dinner table. My life was about survival and a dogged, desperate climb toward something better. The financial struggles my parents had used to justify my path seemed to mysteriously evaporate whenever Veronica needed something. A semester abroad in Rome? An essential cultural experience, my father declared as he wired her thousands of dollars. A new, top-of-the-line laptop for her design software. A necessary tool for her craft, my mother said, typing in her credit card number without a second thought. When Veronica graduated, they threw another massive party and gifted her a brand new car to help her get started. When I graduated with my associate's degree, I got a congratulations card with a $20 bill inside. The double standard was so blatant it was almost absurd. I tried to talk to them about it once, a few months after I'd transferred to a state university, still working 2 jobs to cover my own tuition and rent for a tiny off-campus apartment. "I just don't understand," I said to my mother one afternoon, trying to keep my voice steady. "You told me there was no money, but you're constantly sending Veronica cash. It doesn't seem fair." My mother sighed, her expression a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Pamela, you're being dramatic. Veronica has different needs. The world she's in is very expensive. Besides, she's pursuing a creative passion. You're the practical one. You've always been so good at managing on your own. We're proud of your independence." Her words were meant to sound like a compliment, but they felt like a cage. My independence wasn't a choice, it was a necessity they had forced upon me. My practicality wasn't a personality trait, it was a survival mechanism. They had praised me for skills I had only developed because they had abandoned me. It was a cruel and twisted form of psychological manipulation, and for a long time, I fell for it. I internalized their narrative. I was the responsible one, the one who didn't need help, the one who could handle it. After I finally graduated with my bachelor's in finance, with honors, no thanks to them, I landed an entry-level job at a small investment firm. The pay was low and the hours were brutal, but I was determined. I lived frugally, saving every penny, slowly building a life for myself brick by brick. Veronica, armed with her prestigious degree, had landed a position at a high-end architecture firm in the city. My parents co-signed the lease on her luxury downtown apartment and loaned her the money for the deposit and first month's rent, a loan I knew would never be repaid. Family gatherings became exercises in biting my tongue. Every holiday was dominated by Veronica's latest project, her recent promotion, or her upcoming trip to some exotic location for architectural inspiration. I would sit there, listening to the chorus of praise, and my own achievements felt like dust in comparison. I'd been promoted to a junior analyst. That was nice. Veronica was designing a wing for a new art museum. I had finally paid off my student loans. That's great, honey. Veronica was featured in a local design magazine. The ultimate betrayal, however, was more insidious than just money. It was the way they framed my choices as my own. Pamela chose a more stable, less demanding path, my father would tell relatives. She was never as ambitious as Veronica. They had actively handicapped me and then credited me with choosing to run a shorter race. They stole my dream and then patted me on the back for being so down-to-earth for not having it. My best friend, Liam, was the only one who saw the situation for what it was. "It's not about money, Pam," he told me one night over cheap pizza in my apartment. "It's about control. They need Veronica to be the shining star because her success reflects on them, and for her to shine so brightly, they need you in the shadows. It's a sick dynamic." He was right, it was sick, and the worst part was that I had let it happen. I had accepted my role as the supportive, less important sister for so long that I had almost started to believe it myself. That feeling of being second best, so ingrained in me since my college applications, had become a core part of my identity. But deep down, a spark of defiance was still there, waiting. It was small and weak, but it hadn't been extinguished. Not yet. I just needed a reason to fan it into a flame. And that reason was coming, hidden in a place I never would have expected: my parents' own messy paperwork. For nearly a decade, I operated under the assumptions my parents had laid out. I was the lesser daughter, the one who cost less, the one who needed less. I built my life on that shaky ground, becoming fiercely self-reliant. I climbed the ladder at my firm, moving from junior analyst to a senior position. I was good at my job because my entire life had been an exercise in analyzing risk, managing scarce resources, and finding value where others saw none. My work was my refuge. In the world of balance sheets and market projections, numbers didn't lie. Everything was logical, traceable, and fair. The discovery happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon. My parents were planning a trip to Europe to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary and had asked me to come over and help them with some online stuff. This was a common occurrence. Despite their professional success, they were surprisingly inept when it came to technology. Usually, it was about setting up a new device or troubleshooting a printer. This time, it was about sorting through their digital financial records to create a budget for their trip. "We just need you to look at our savings and investment accounts and tell us what's a reasonable amount to spend," my mother said, gesturing vaguely at the family computer in the study. "Everything should be in the finances folder on the desktop." I sat down at the familiar desk, the scent of old books and my father's cologne filling the air. As I navigated through their poorly organized files, I felt a familiar pang of resentment. Here I was, the daughter who wouldn't understand the intricacies of their finances, now being asked to manage them for free. I opened a file containing scanned bank statements from years ago, looking for long-term savings patterns. I was clicking through PDFs, my eyes glazing over when I saw it. The file was mislabeled, Household Repairs 2011, but the document inside was a bank statement for a savings account I had never heard of. It was dated from the year I was a senior in high school, the year I was preparing my college applications. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. The account was in my parents' names. At the top of the statement, a balance was listed that made my breath catch in my throat, over $250,000. My heart started to pound. This couldn't be right. This was the exact time they claimed to be recovering from paying for Veronica's first year of college. This was the year they told me they were so financially strapped that community college was my only option. With shaking hands, I started digging deeper. I cross-referenced the account number with other documents, and soon I found the source of the funds. It was an inheritance my father had received from his aunt. The deposit was made just 2 months before my college presentation. They hadn't been broke. They had been sitting on $250,000. I felt a wave of nausea. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and heavy. EPT digging, my professional instincts taking over, pushing down the emotional tidal wave that was threatening to engulf me. I found more statements. I saw the money sitting there, untouched, throughout my entire time at community college. It was earning a pathetic amount of interest in a low-yield savings account, doing nothing. Then I found the withdrawal slips. The first major withdrawal was not for Veronica's tuition, as they had already paid that from their primary accounts. It was 2 years later for a down payment. I searched the county's public property records, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The name on the deed matched the withdrawal amount and date perfectly. It was a condo. A luxury condo in the city, purchased the month Veronica graduated from her Ivy League university. They hadn't just paid for her education, they had bought her a home. My blood ran cold. The narrative of the struggling parents who sacrificed everything for their brilliant daughter was a complete and utter fabrication. They hadn't been stretched thin. They had a secret nest egg, an inheritance they had deliberately concealed from me. They had watched me work myself to the bone, flipping burgers and tutoring teenagers, all while they had the means to help me sitting in a bank account. I felt like I was going to be sick. The betrayal was so much deeper than I had ever imagined. It wasn't a matter of limited resources or poor financial planning. It was a conscious, calculated decision. They had looked at their 2 daughters, looked at their pile of money, and decided that one deserved a future handed to her on a silver platter, and the other deserved to fight for scraps. I quickly saved copies of the statements and the property record to a USB drive I had in my purse. I closed all the files and deleted the recent history from the browser, my mind working on autopilot. I walked back into the living room, my face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "Everything looks fine," I told them, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "You can easily afford a very nice trip. I've put a summary on your desktop." My mother beamed. "Oh, thank you, sweetie. You're such a lifesaver. What would we do without our practical Pamela?" I just smiled, a chillingly calm smile. Inside, I was shattering. The foundation of my life, built on the lie of their financial hardship and my own supposed practicality, had just been demolished. But as the initial shock subsided, it was replaced by something else. A cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in my chest. They thought I was just the practical one, the one who was good with numbers. They had no idea. They had just handed their financial analyst daughter the exact evidence she needed to burn their carefully constructed world to the ground. They had underestimated me for the last time. My investigation was just beginning. The drive home from my parents' house was a blur. The USB drive in my pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. When I finally got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on my couch in the dark, the city lights twinkling outside my window, and let the full weight of the betrayal wash over me. For years, I had carried the burden of their lie, believing I was less deserving, less worthy of investment. Now I knew the truth. It wasn't about worthiness. It was about their deliberate, cruel favoritism. The next morning, the grief and shock had cooled into a steely, analytical focus. As a financial analyst, My job was to find the story hidden within the numbers, to follow the money, and to expose the truth, no matter how well it was buried. I was about to apply every skill I had ever learned to the biggest project of my life, a full forensic audit of my own family. I started with the documents I had copied, the secret bank account statements and the property record for Veronica's condo. This was my starting point, my Rosetta Stone for deciphering their lies. I created a secure, encrypted folder on my personal laptop and began building a timeline. First, I examined the inheritance. I did some digging into public records related to my great-aunt's estate. It turned out the inheritance was even larger than I thought. The $250,000 was just what was left after they had already used a portion of it. For what? The records were old, but with a few paid searches on legal websites, I found it. They had used the initial part of the inheritance to pay off the remaining mortgage on their own house. They did this just before Veronica's senior year of high school, which freed up a massive amount of their monthly income. They then funneled directly into a college fund designated for Veronica and Veronica alone. The lie was even more audacious than I had realized. They didn't just have a secret nest egg. They had strategically restructured their entire financial landscape to support my sister, while simultaneously creating a believable narrative tight finances to present to me. My next step was to understand the full extent of their financial support for Veronica. The condo was just the beginning. I knew my mother, as a real estate agent, would have access to all sorts of records and ways to move money. I suspected the condo, down payment, wasn't the only major gift. This required a more delicate approach. I couldn't just ask for more financial documents. I needed a plausible reason to be looking into their affairs. My opportunity came a few weeks later when my dad called me, panicking slightly. "Pamela, your mother and I are being audited," he said, his voice tense. "Just a random check, they say, but we're in a bit of a state. We have boxes of receipts and statements going back years. Could you possibly come help us get organized for the accountant?" It was the perfect excuse. It was as if the universe was handing me the keys to the kingdom. I agreed immediately, feigning sympathy and offering my professional expertise to calm his nerves. That weekend, I arrived at their house to find the study overflowing with cardboard boxes filled with financial records. It was a goldmine. For 2 full days, I sat at their desk, meticulously sorting through a decade of their lives. I told them I needed to be alone to concentrate, and they were more than happy to leave me to it. With every file I opened, the picture became clearer and more damning. I scanned and photographed everything of importance with my phone, uploading the files to my secure cloud storage. Checks written to Veronica labeled loan, in the memo line that never had corresponding repayments. Credit card statements showing they were paying for her utilities, her car insurance, and even her groceries for the first 5 years after she graduated. Investment account statements showing a trust that was set up in her name, but not in mine. The most sickening discovery was related to my own, meager student loans. I found a document from their financial planner advising them on tax-efficient ways to help their children with education costs. There was a section on paying off student loans as a gift. Next to it, my father had written a note in the margin: "Number Pamela needs to learn responsibility. Let her pay her own way. Builds character." Builds character. They had the means and the expert advice on how to help me, but they chose not to, cloaking their neglect in the guise of a life lesson. They weren't just favoring Veronica, they were actively engineering my struggle. By the end of the weekend, I had a comprehensive spreadsheet. I cataloged every dollar they had spent on Veronica beyond what an average parent might provide. The full Ivy League tuition, the semester abroad, the car, the condo down payment, the 5 years of subsidized living, the contributions to her exclusive trust fund. I then calculated the total, adjusting for inflation. The final number was staggering. It was well over $1 million. And what had I received? A $20 bill in a graduation card. The contrast was so stark, so grotesquely unfair, that it was beyond anything I could have imagined. My quiet resentment morphed into a cold, hard rage. Liam was horrified when I showed him my findings. We sat in his apartment, the spreadsheet glowing on my laptop screen. "This is monstrous, Pam," he said, his voice low. "This isn't just favoritism. This is a calculated, long-term campaign of financial and emotional abuse." "I know," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I was past the point of tears. They built her a pedestal out of money they told me they didn't have, and they made me feel guilty for even asking for a foothold. "So what are you going to do?" he asked, looking at me with concern. "Are you going to confront them?" A slow, determined smile spread across my face. "Confront them? Oh, I'm going to do more than that, Liam. I'm a financial analyst. They taught me to build character and pay my own way. Well, I'm about to present them with an invoice for my character-building education. It's time for an audit of my own, and this is one audit they are not going to pass." The rage I felt after uncovering the full extent of my family's deceit was a powerful motivator. But I knew that a purely emotional confrontation would be useless. They would dismiss me as dramatic, just as they always had. They would twist my words, gaslight me, and paint me as ungrateful. To win this, I couldn't just be angry, I had to be smarter. I had to use the very skills they had forced me to develop: pragmatism, meticulous planning, and financial acumen. My plan wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to ruin them financially or destroy their lives. That would, in a way, bring me down to their level. My goal was something more profound. I wanted acknowledgement, I wanted restitution, and most importantly, I wanted to reclaim the narrative of my own life. I wanted them to see, in undeniable blah. CK and White, the cost of their choices. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, securing my independence. Before I could confront them, I needed to ensure I was completely insulated from any potential fallout. Though they hadn't supported me financially, we were still family. A major confrontation could have unforeseen consequences. Over the next 6 months, I worked tirelessly. I took on freelance financial consulting projects on the side, funneling every extra dollar into my savings and investments. I built up an emergency fund that could cover my living expenses for a full year. I also made a significant career move. I leveraged my experience and excellent performance record to get a new job at a larger, more prestigious firm. The position came with a significant salary increase and, more importantly, a role that gave me more autonomy and respect. It was a crucial psychological step. I wasn't just Pamela, the analyst. I was Pamela, a sought-after financial strategist. I was building a professional identity that had nothing to do with my family's perception of me. My confidence soared. I was no longer the girl who had been denied her dream school. I was a woman who had built her own success from the ground up. Phase 2, the presentation of evidence. This was the core of my plan. I spent weeks compiling my findings into a professional, unassailable presentation, the kind I would prepare for a high-stakes corporate board meeting. I titled it, "The Starkweather Family Financial Disparity Report, a 10-Year Review." Starkweather was my family name. The report was cold, clinical, and devastatingly thorough. It included an executive summary, a brief, powerful overview of the calculated $1 million plus discrepancy in parental investment between their 2 children, a detailed timeline, charting every major financial event, from the secret inheritance and mortgage payoff to the funding of Veronica's life. Scanned documents, copies of the bank statements, the property records, the checks, and the financial planner's notes, each one a nail in the coffin of their lies. A comparative analysis, 2 columns side by side, investment in Veronica versus investment in Pamela. The contrast on the page was brutal. One column was filled with entries totaling over $1 million, the other was starkly, painfully empty. An opportunity cost calculation. This was my masterstroke. I calculated the potential growth of my own net worth had I been given an equivalent starting advantage. Using standard market investment models, I projected where I would be financially if I had graduated debt-free from a top university and been gifted a property down payment. The number was astronomical. It wasn't about demanding that money. It was about quantifying what they had taken from me, not just the cash, but the years of accelerated growth and financial security. Phase 3, the demand. My report would not end with just the evidence. It would end with a single, non-negotiable demand. I wasn't asking for $1 million. I knew that would be impossible and would only lead to a protracted, ugly war. My demand was strategic, symbolic, and deeply personal. I did some research and found a local nonprofit organization that provided scholarships and mentorship to promising students from low-income backgrounds who wanted to pursue degrees in finance and business, students who were exactly like I had been. My demand was this. My parents would establish a charitable trust in my name, called the Pamela Starkweather Educational Fund, with a founding donation of $250,000, the exact amount of the initial secret inheritance. This demand was perfect for several reasons. Firstly, it wasn't for me personally, which would make it incredibly difficult for them to label me as greedy. I was asking them to fund the dreams of others, correcting their past wrongs by doing future good. Secondly, it was a public act. A charitable trust would create a public record, forever linking my name with educational philanthropy and their money. It would be a permanent, undeniable testament to the truth. Thirdly, the amount was significant enough to be a real consequence for them, but not enough to bankrupt them. It was justice, not destruction. With the plan finalized and the report printed and bound into 3 professional-looking booklets, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in months. I was no longer a victim of their story. I was the author of my own. I called a family meeting, telling them I had an important financial matter to discuss regarding their estate planning. They agreed without hesitation, likely assuming I was about to offer more free financial advice. I set the date for the following Sunday. The stage was set for the day the debt would finally come due. Sunday arrived, gray and overcast, mirroring the storm that was about to break inside my parents' pristine home. I invited Veronica as well, telling her the meeting concern. Ed, the family's long-term financial legacy. Her attendance was crucial. This was as much about her complicity as it was about our parents' actions. I walked into the living room, the same room where my dreams had been so casually dismissed a decade earlier. My father was in his armchair, my mother on the sofa, and Veronica was perched elegantly on a love seat, scrolling through her phone. They all looked up, smiling, expecting a routine chat about wills and trusts. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady and professional. I placed 3 bound copies of my report on the coffee table. "I've prepared a document that I believe requires your immediate attention." My father picked one up, his brow furrowing as he read the title, The Starkweather Family Financial Disparity Report. Veronica put down her phone, a flicker of confusion on her face. My mother just stared at the cover, her smile faltering. "Before you open it," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "I want to set the scene. 10 years ago, in this very room, you told me that the family was in a precarious financial state. You told me you had stretched yourselves to the limit for Veronica's education and that all you could afford for me was community college. You told me I wouldn't understand the intricacies of your finances." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I've since grown up to understand financial intricacies for a living, and I've discovered that every single thing you told me that day was a lie. I gestured to the reports. "Please turn to page 1. The silence in the room was absolute as they began to read. I watched their faces, a detached and clinical observer. I saw my father's face drain of color as he saw the copy of the secret bank statement. I saw my mother's hand tremble as she turned to the page detailing the condo purchase. And I saw Veronica's confident smirk dissolve into a mask of disbelief and dawning horror as she saw the side-by-side comparison of their investment in us. It took them 20 minutes to get through the entire document. When my father finally looked up, his eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and fury. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "You gave it to me," I replied calmly, "during your audit. You left me alone with a decade of your financial history. Did you really think I wouldn't find the truth? It's my job to find the truth in numbers." My mother started to cry, the soft, performative tears I knew so well. "Pamela, how could you? Spying on us? This is a terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I shot back, my voice like ice. "There is no misunderstanding a $250,000 inheritance you hid from me. There is no misunderstanding a condo you bought for my sister while I was working 2 jobs to pay my rent. And there is absolutely no misunderstanding," I said, my gaze locking onto my father's. "A handwritten note saying I needed to build character by paying my own way. You didn't build my character. You committed financial sabotage." Veronica finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy. I didn't know. About the inheritance, the condo, they told me it was a loan." "Did you ever pay it back, Veronica?" I asked, my voice flat. "Did you ever once question why your path was paved with gold while mine was covered in gravel? Or did you just enjoy the view from the pedestal they built for you?" She had no answer. She just stared at her hands, the star architect suddenly looking small and lost. I let the weight of their silence fill the room before I delivered the final blow. "Turn to the last page, the addendum." They fumbled with the pages. There, in clear, concise terms, was my demand. The establishment of the Pamela Starkweather Educational Fund with a non-negotiable seed donation of $250,000. My father slammed the report down on the table. "This is blackmail. This is insane. We are not giving you $250,000. "You're mistaken," I said, standing up. "I'm not asking you to give me anything. I am giving you a choice. Option A is you establish this fund. You will right a fraction of your wrongs by helping young people who are in the exact position you forced me into. Your reputation in the community as generous philanthropists remains intact. No one outside of this room ever has to know the sordid details of this report." I picked up my bag. "Option B is you refuse. In which case, this report, with all its supporting documentation, becomes a very interesting topic of conversation. I wonder what your friends at the country club, your clients, and the board of the local dental association would think about this story. I wonder what the IRS would think about all of those undeclared financial gifts you gave to Veronica. The audit you were so worried about would look like a walk in the park." It was a calculated, brutal move, and it landed exactly as I intended. The threat of public shame and professional consequence. NSAIS was the only language they understood. My mother's crying intensified. My father looked ashen, trapped. Veronica looked like she was going to be sick. "You have 1 week to have your lawyer contact me with the paperwork to establish the trust," I said, walking to the door. "This is not a negotiation. It is the consequence of your actions. You wanted me to be practical and independent. Congratulations. This is me being both." I walked out of that house and didn't look back, leaving the wreckage of their lies scattered on the coffee table behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free of the weight of their judgment. I hadn't just confronted them, I had balanced the ledger. The week following the confrontation was the quietest of my life. I didn't hear a single word from my parents or Veronica. I half expected angry phone calls, desperate pleas, or even attempts at manipulation, but there was only silence. It was a silence I welcomed. It gave me space to process the emotional fallout of detonating a bomb in the middle of my family. Liam was my rock, checking in every day, reminding me that what I had done was not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. On the 6th day, I received an email. It wasn't from my parents, but from a lawyer at a prestigious downtown firm. The subject line was simple: Starkweather Family Trust. He confirmed he had been retained by Richard and Alina Starkweather to establish a charitable fund as per my specifications. He requested a meeting to finalize the details of the charter. A wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. I had won. It wasn't a gloating, triumphant feeling. It was a deep, quiet, and satisfying sense of justice. They had chosen to contain the damage rather than face the public humiliation of the truth. The process of setting up the Pamela Starkweather Educational Fund took a few months. I was involved in every step, ensuring the charter was ironclad. The fund's mission was clear: to provide full scholarships to high-achieving, low-income students in our state who were the first in their family to attend college and were pursuing degrees in business or finance. I was named the permanent, non-voting chairperson of the board, giving me oversight for life. The initial $250,000 was transferred from my parents' accounts into the fund's new investment portfolio, which I would personally oversee pro bono. The circle was complete. The money they had hidden to deny me, an education, would now be used to grant that same opportunity to countless others. My relationship with my family, as expected, was irrevocably fractured. I saw my parents a few times at obligatory extended family events. The interactions were strained and superficial. They were polite, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a fearful, resentful deference. They looked at me differently now. The dismissive way they once viewed practical Pamela was gone. In its place was the wary respect one gives to a formidable adversary. They had created their own monster, and now they had to live with her. Veronica was the one who surprised me. About 6 months after the confrontation, she asked to meet me for coffee. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. She looked different, less polished, more tired. She told me that the revelation had sent her into a spiral of self-doubt. "All my life, I thought I earned everything," she said, stirring her latte. "My confidence, my success, I thought it was all mine, but now I see how much of it was just handed to me. My foundation was built on your disadvantage." She apologized. It wasn't a perfect apology. It was laced with her own pain and confusion, but it felt genuine. She admitted that she had willingly participated in the family myth of her superiority because it benefited her. For the first time, I saw her not as a rival, but as a different kind of victim of our parents' toxic dynamic, one who was coddled into weakness while I was forged into strength by neglect. Our relationship didn't magically heal, but a fragile truce formed. We started talking occasionally, without our parents as intermediaries. We began the slow, awkward process of getting to know each other as adults, not as the golden child and the runner-up. As for me, my life blossomed. Freed from the weight of my family's narrative, I thrived. My career continued to ascend. I bought my own condo, a bigger, brighter one than Veronica's, with my own money. I found a healthy, loving relationship with a man who valued my strength and independence. The greatest joy, however, came from the fund. A year after its creation, I sat on the scholarship selection committee and read the applications. The stories of these kids, their ambition, their struggles, their incredible potential, brought tears to my eyes. When we awarded the first 2 full scholarships, I met the recipients. A young woman who wanted to be a CPA to help small businesses in her immigrant community, and a young man who had taught himself to code and wanted to start his own fintech company. Seeing their faces, so full of hope and gratitude, I felt a sense of purpose that dwarfed any of the pain from my past. My parents' betrayal had been a poison, but I had found a way to turn it into an antidote. They had meant to limit my world, but in the end, their actions enabled me to expand the worlds of others. I closed the ledger on my past. I didn't forgive my parents. Some things are unforgivable, but I no longer carried the anger. It was simply a fact, an event that had happened and had shaped me, but no longer defined me. My name, Pamela Starkweather, was no longer a symbol of being second best. It was now a symbol of hope and opportunity, permanently attached to a legacy of my own making. And that was a return on investment that no spreadsheet could ever truly capture.